The fire was still smoldering when the sky split open. A sharp crack of thunder rolled over the prairie like cannon fire, shaking the dry, cracked earth beneath Eliza Merrick's bare feet. Smoke curled up from the ruins of what had been her home. 4 wooden walls, a shingled roof, a porch swing her son built with crooked nails and pride. Now it was a blackened husk, glowing in the rainless stormlight. She didn't move. Not yet. She watched the last piece of roof collapse inward with a tired groan, felt the heat baking into her skin, and held the rifle tighter in her hands. Her knuckles were white. Her boy was gone. They had come at dusk, 3 riders, men with sun-scorched skin and spurs that clinked with each step. She'd known something was wrong the moment they didn't ask for water, didn't take off their hats, didn't look her in the eye. She'd offered the yearling calf, her wedding band, anything they could carry, but they'd only come for one thing. Debt's got to be paid, the tall one had said, gripping Caleb by the arm. I never signed nothing, Eliza had spat, heart thundering in her ears. Your husband did. That cold, matter-of-fact tone. 3 years back in Salina. Took coin from Captain Slate's men, for tools, for grain, for protection. A sneer. Debt don't die with the debtor. Her son had fought, screamed, kicked at the tall man's boot and bit his hand, but the man laughed, like he enjoyed it. Eliza had raised the rifle then, trembling but steady, aiming straight between his eyes. And yet, she hadn't pulled the trigger, not fast enough. A backhand sent her to the porch. The rifle flew from her grip. By the time she staggered upright, bleeding from her lip and dizzy from the blow, the riders were already disappearing over the rise, Caleb's cries echoing like a ghost across the land. She ran until her legs buckled, ran until her throat was raw from screaming his name. But prairie night falls fast, and no one can chase ghosts through the dark. That had been 3 nights ago. Now, with her dress torn and face streaked with ash, she knelt in the soot of her life and whispered her boy's name again. Not loud, just enough to keep her heart from breaking completely. The first drops of rain splattered against her skin. A branch cracked in the woods behind her. She turned too slowly. The man who stepped from the trees was wrapped in a battered oilskin coat, soaked dark at the shoulders. One half of his face was smooth, pale. The other half, a twisted map of fire-scarred skin that ran from brow to chin. His left eye was glazed, unfocused. But the right, a cold gray, watched her like a hawk. He didn't speak. Just looked. Don't come any closer, Eliza warned, raising the rifle with 2 hands, though it shook with the weight of it. I'll shoot. He stopped. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. You're Eliza Merrick. She flinched. Who wants to know? The man let out a breath, not quite a sigh. He crouched slowly and pulled a bundle from his coat, dried meat, a canteen wrapped in rough cloth. He placed them at the edge of the clearing and stepped back, hands raised. Name's Jonah Creedy. She didn't lower the rifle. You were in the war, she said finally, voice flat. Everyone was, he replied. Something about his tone, neither defensive nor proud, made her hesitate. She stepped forward cautiously, picked up the bundle. Her stomach growled, but she didn't eat. I didn't ask for company. I know. He crouched again by a rock, unfastening a thin rope from his belt. It held 3 rabbit carcasses, still bleeding. But I figure you'll need more than ashes and grief if you aim to get your son back. At the mention of Caleb, her throat tightened. You saw them? I saw the men who took him. Jonah's gaze stayed fixed on the fire pit between them. They were 2 days west when I crossed their trail. You followed them? I've been hunting them longer than you know. Eliza's knees buckled and she sat, suddenly aware of how empty her body was. Of food, of strength, of hope. Why? She whispered. The firelight caught the worst side of his face and he didn't flinch. Because I used to ride with them. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared. Jonah stared back. Captain Slate saved me from hanging, gave me a horse, a purpose. I paid for that purpose with fire and blood. I burned farms, took men from their homes, took boys too. Didn't ask why, just followed orders. He rolled a pebble between his fingers. Then one day I didn't. What? Changed? He glanced at her. A girl in Missouri. 16 maybe. She had a music box in her lap when they came. Wouldn't let go of it. Not even when they pulled her away. He swallowed hard. I stood there. Didn't stop it. Could've, but didn't. Next morning I took my horse and left. Since then I've followed the ashes I helped scatter. Eliza said nothing for a long time. The wind moaned through the trees. Somewhere a hawk cried. Finally she spoke. You expect me to trust you? No. Jonah leaned back. But if you want that boy back, you'll need someone who knows how they think, where they go, what they fear. And what do they fear? He smiled without humor. Ghosts. And I'm halfway there already. Eliza studied him. Every inch of her screamed to run, to point the rifle again, to send this stranger away and lock herself in grief. But grief didn't bring children home. Fear didn't ride into fire. Caleb's only 10, she said. I figured. He's stubborn, brave, smarter than his father ever was. He likes to carve whistles out of willow branches. Jonah nodded slowly. Then we better get moving. She blinked. Now? They'll make camp near the Devil's Backbone by nightfall. If we leave before sunup, we can catch him by the third day. You're sure? I'm not sure of much, Jonah said, standing. But I've been walking long enough to know the road to redemption don't wait for comfort. Eliza looked at the ashes of her home once more, then at the burned face of the man who had offered her meat, water, and a chance. She didn't believe in fate, but she believed in choice. And right now, there wasn't much of one. She stood. If we do this, we do it my way. No shooting unless we have to. No more innocents. Jonah nodded. Fair. And if I don't like your answers, I'll leave you behind. You won't like most of my answers, he said, and there was something almost like sadness in his voice, but I'll still walk. They broke camp before dawn. Eliza didn't ask where they were going. Jonah didn't explain. He handed her a compass, pointed west, and walked ahead without ceremony. She followed, clutching the rifle close, Caleb's name like a rhythm in her step. By mid-morning, they crossed through open prairie, all yellow grass and coyote howls. Eliza's muscles burned. She didn't complain. Jonah didn't speak unless necessary. Once he slowed to lift her over a muddy creek, his touch brief and impersonal. That night, they found shelter under an overhang of rock. The fire was small, quiet. Jonah sat whittling at a branch. Eliza watched the sparks dance into the stars. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. He didn't look up. Because I'm tired of leaving graves behind. She turned to the fire, unsure what to say to that. There was no comfort in revenge, no peace in burning trails. But maybe, just maybe, there was a boy ahead who still remembered how to whistle, and that was worth walking toward. Behind them, the wind shifted east. Ahead, the wilderness stretched black and vast, but the fire held, and so did they, for now. The second morning broke under a bruised sky. Clouds hung low, heavy with the threat of rain but withholding it like a promise unkept. Eliza's boots were already soaked from the waist-high grass, and every step forward seemed to pull her deeper into silence. Jonah walked several paces ahead, wordless as usual, his long stride unyielding, his scarred face angled toward the wind as if it spoke to him alone. She hated that she had begun to rely on his presence. There was something steady in the way he moved, like he had walked through worse and kept walking still. She hadn't asked where he learned to track, to navigate the ridges and creeks without pause, to find cover before storms touched down. He hadn't told her, and she hadn't pressed. But watching him now, boots leaving no trace behind, she wondered what he had left behind that made him so sure of where to go. I can walk on my own, she snapped when he paused to offer her a hand across a tangle of roots. I know, he replied, stepping aside to let her pass first. But it's easier if you don't fall. I'm not made of glass. No. But pride's heavier than a pack. Try not to trip on it. She said nothing and kept walking. They followed an old deer trail that curled west, skirting the edge of a ravine that dropped so suddenly it made her dizzy to look. A hawk circled above them, its cry thin and ragged. Jonah glanced up once, then pulled a cloth from his coat and wiped the sweat from his neck. The morning heat was building despite the clouds, and insects hummed in the grass like restless whispers. By noon, they reached a dried creek bed littered with broken limbs and brittle bones. Jonah knelt beside a hoofprint half sunken in the dirt, his fingers brushing it gently. Fresh. Less than a day. 4 riders, 1 cart. Her breath caught. Caleb? He nodded once, his expression unreadable. The carts knew. They didn't have it when I last tracked them. Could be supplies, could be injured, or young. Eliza closed her eyes, for a moment battling the wave of nausea. We're close. We're closer, Jonah corrected. Close means danger. They'll get nervous. Slate doesn't like ghosts following his trail. She opened her mouth to ask what that meant, when a sudden crack split the air. A tree branch or something more deliberate. Jonah froze. His hand went to the revolver at his side, and he gave her a sharp look. She crouched instinctively, heart pounding, fingers tightening around her rifle. A figure stumbled out from the brush, on the far side of the creek, tall, ragged, limping. His hat was torn, his shirt stained dark down the sleeve. When he saw them, he raised a hand weakly. Jonah stepped forward, but did not lower his weapon. Name. Ellis, the man rasped. Water, please, just water. Eliza moved to reach for her canteen, but Jonah stopped her. Who sent you? No one. Ellis sank to his knees. I ran from Slate's camp. I was part of them, but not anymore. Why run? Because I saw what they did. What they're going to do to that boy. Eliza's heart seized. Jonah's voice hardened. Where is he? Ellis looked up, eyes bloodshot and frantic. North Ridge, Red Hollow. They got a stockade built there. Moving people through, children mostly. Slate's trading them. Eliza gasped. Trading them? For weapons, ammunition, liquor. He's got deals with men who shouldn't be breathing. Jonah's hand twitched. Why tell us? Because that boy, he wouldn't stop praying, wouldn't stop saying his mother was coming. Ellis choked a bitter laugh. Didn't cry once, just kept staring at us like we were monsters. I couldn't take it. Jonah stepped forward fast and sudden, gripped the man by his collar. What's he wearing? A red flannel shirt, one sleeve torn, brown trousers, dirty. But he's alive, I swear. Jonah let him go. Ellis collapsed again, sobbing now. Eliza was already walking, every part of her burning. Jonah caught up in 2 strides. Don't get reckless. I'm not, she said through clenched teeth. I'm getting my son. They left Ellis behind. Jonah didn't look back. Eliza wanted to, but couldn't afford the pause. Every second they wasted was another second Caleb was in a cage. She knew it. Felt it. The wind carried it like a curse. That night, they didn't make camp. They rested under the curve of a black hill, sleeping in shifts. Jonah sharpened his eye, knife by firelight, while Eliza stared into the embers, imagining her son's face. Mud on his cheek, a scrape on his chin, the defiant tilt of his head when he refused to finish supper. She hadn't known she'd miss that so much. Why did you come back? She asked suddenly. Jonah didn't stop sharpening. From where? The militia. The war. Why aren't you still with them? He paused, blade frozen mid-stroke. Because Slate was never in it for the cause. He wanted chaos, and I used to think chaos was easier than grief, but it's not. It just delays it. Eliza pulled her blanket tighter. You think Caleb's still whole? I think he's waiting. And he knows you're coming. That's more than most people get. They didn't speak again until the fire burned low. By the next afternoon, they reached the rise overlooking Red Hollow. It was worse than she'd imagined. The camp was nestled deep in the gorge, surrounded by makeshift barricades. Tents clustered like tumors around a central pit, where smoke drifted up from slow-burning fires. Men milled around, rifles slung, voices barking orders. And there, near the far corner, she saw them. Children, locked in a pen, no bigger than a chicken coop. No shelter, no blankets, just huddled shapes behind wooden slats. Jonah lowered the spyglass slowly. "We'll need to go in tonight. No open assault. Too many rifles. You're not leaving me behind?" "I wasn't planning."
So?
They waited for darkness. The wind shifted near midnight, blowing smoke across the ridge. Jonah led her down a narrow game path, silent as the shadows. She mimicked his steps, breath held, heart in her throat. When they reached the outer fence, he pulled a thin blade from his boot and cut a hole just wide enough for her to squeeze through. She did, crawling over damp dirt and under thorn bush. The scent of sweat and rot filled her nose. It took everything not to gag. They moved between tents, stepping over discarded bottles and crumpled bedrolls. A dog barked once, but Jonah tossed, a scrap of meat, and it retreated. They reached the pen. Eliza's fingers trembled as she reached through the bars. "Caleb," she whispered. A shape stirred. Slowly, two eyes opened in the dark. Recognition dawned, too slow to feel real. "Ma?" She choked back a sob. "It's me, baby. We're getting you out." He moved toward her, clutching the bars. His face was thinner, streaked with dirt, but his eyes, those were still hers, still alive. Jonah crouched by the lock, working quickly. 10 seconds, then we run. The gate creaked open. Eliza caught Caleb in her arms, pressing his face into her shoulder, breathing in the smell of him. Sweat, fear, earth. It was the sweetest thing she'd ever known. "Can you run?" she asked. He nodded, silent. Then came the shout. "Hey!" Rifles lifted, feet thundered, the camp lit up like a struck match. Jonah shoved her forward. "Go." They ran, Caleb clutched tight to Eliza's chest. Bullets tore the night. Jonah turned and fired twice, clean and sharp. One man fell, then another. But more came. Eliza tripped. Caleb tumbled from her arms. She screamed. Jonah was there before she could reach him, scooping the boy up in one arm and dragging her forward with the other. They dove into the brush. The world blurred. By the time they stopped running, Eliza couldn't breathe. Caleb was gasping, eyes wide with terror. Jonah leaned against a tree, blood soaking through his coat. Not his, she realized, one of theirs. "I told you," he said, voice rough. "We're closer." Eliza wept, cradling Caleb, her tears silent. Jonah turned away, scanning the darkness. "This isn't over," he muttered. Eliza looked up. "Then what now?" He glanced back, that cold fire in his eye. "Now we take the fight to them." Dawn crept in slowly, as if uncertain it was welcome. Pale light filtered through the branches overhead, casting jagged shadows across the forest floor. Eliza sat beside the fire, her arms wrapped around Caleb, both of them swaddled in a borrowed blanket that smelled faintly of smoke and pine sap. He hadn't spoken much since the rescue, just quiet murmurs in his sleep, names she didn't recognize, numbers he kept repeating under his breath. Jonah stood a few yards away, keeping watch. He hadn't slept. His coat, torn at the shoulder, hung loose around his frame. He looked thinner in the morning light, like the night had stripped something from him too. "He needs food," Jonah said without turning. "I know," Eliza replied, brushing Caleb's hair back. "I'll find something." Jonah finally turned, eyes bleary but sharp. "Stay with him, I'll go." She hesitated. "Are you sure you can?" He nodded once. "I'll be back before the sun climbs." And then he was gone, disappearing into the trees without a sound. Caleb stirred and opened his eyes. For a moment he looked confused, as though unsure where he was. Then he saw her and relaxed. "Did we make it out?" he asked. She pulled him closer. We did. You're safe now. He didn't smile. Instead, he looked toward the trees where Jonah had vanished. He came back for me, didn't he? He could have run, but he didn't. Eliza nodded. He's not the kind that runs. Caleb swallowed, voice quiet. Neither am I. The word struck her harder than she expected. Jonah returned before noon with a rabbit and a handful of wild berries. Eliza cooked over the fire, the meat tough but nourishing. Caleb ate slowly, chewing with deliberate care, like he was afraid the food might vanish. When they finished, Jonah sat down beside them, his expression heavy. There's more of them, he said. Another camp north of here, maybe 3 days on foot. They're moving children from site to site, keeping the trails cold. Slate's not just bartering kids. He's building something. A network. Eliza felt her stomach twist. We can't just run, can we? Jonah shook his head. We ran once. That bought Caleb some time. But others, they won't get that chance. Not unless someone stops it. She met his gaze. So we end it. He blinked, as though surprised to hear it, from her. Then he nodded. That night, while Caleb slept curled beside her, Eliza lay awake listening to the fire crackle. Jonah sat across from her, whittling a stick into sharp points, his fingers moving on instinct. How did you know Slate? She asked. He didn't answer for a long time. We fought together, he said eventually. Same unit, same hell. After the war, he didn't come home like the rest of us. He changed. Started pulling jobs, kidnapping, selling goods, then people. I tried to stop him once. He nearly killed me. Eliza glanced at the long scar on his cheek. That when you left? Jonah nodded. I couldn't keep following him. But I also couldn't forgive myself for what I did follow. I was part of it, Eliza, maybe not the worst of it, but I didn't stop it in time. She was silent, weighing his words. Then she said, You did now. Jonah looked up. The firelight, dancing in his eyes. There was something in them she hadn't seen before. Not relief, not hope. Maybe something deeper. Resolve. They left early the next morning. Caleb rode on Jonah's back for the first few hours, too weak to walk far. But by midday, he insisted on walking himself. Eliza watched him carefully, noting how his posture had changed. He didn't look over his shoulder anymore. He didn't flinch at every sound. He was healing slowly. The trail grew steeper as they headed north. Hills rose into jagged ridges, the wind colder with each step. They passed the charred remains of a burned-out homestead. Eliza paused, staring at the blackened porch swing swaying in the breeze. This was someone's home, she whispered. Jonah crouched beside a shattered window. Slate's men. Burned it last fall, the owners didn't make it. Eliza reached out and touched the remains of the doorframe. We can't let this keep happening. We won't, Jonah said. They pressed on, each mile hard-earned. That night, Jonah taught Caleb how to make a snare, how to listen for movement in the brush. The boy absorbed it all, nodding seriously, asking thoughtful questions. Eliza watched, a strange pride swelling in her chest. It wasn't just survival. It was reclaiming something. Power, agency, purpose. 2 nights later, they reached a ridge, overlooking the second camp. It was more fortified than the last, with wooden walls, guard towers, and a lookout armed with a repeater rifle. Inside, tents sprawled out in precise rows. Torches flickered at every corner. Jonah pulled out a crudely drawn map. We wait until second watch changes, then we go in. Same plan, quiet, fast, get the children out, burn the rest. Eliza pointed to a tent near the edge. That looks like a command tent. Slate might be there. Jonah gave her a grim smile. Let's hope so. That night the wind howled through the trees. Eliza kissed Caleb on the forehead before leaving him hidden in a rock hollow, her rifle slung across her back, knife at her hip. He didn't cry. He just held her hand tightly. You come back, he whispered. I will. Jonah and Eliza moved like shadows. The guards didn't see them coming. They slit the first man's throat. The second they strangled. Then Jonah climbed, the nearest tower snapping the lookout's neck before he could scream. Eliza crept toward the cages. This time more children, at least 20, huddled together, eyes wide with terror. She picked the lock, whispered reassurances, gestured for silence. Jonah appeared beside her, motioning to the tree line. The children began to crawl out. Then came the voice. "Jonah, that you?" They turned. Slate stood in front of the command tent, revolver drawn, lantern in hand. He looked older, crueler, his face lined with the sins of a dozen winters. "You should have stayed dead," he sneered. Jonah stepped forward, gun raised. "You should have stayed human." Slate fired. Missed. Jonah didn't. One shot, right through the gut. Slate fell, choking, blood pooling fast. Jonah stood over him as the last of the children vanished into the dark. "They weren't yours to sell," Jonah said. Slate tried to speak, but only gurgled. By dawn, the camp was burning. Eliza led the children through the valley, her arm around Caleb, who carried one of the younger girls on his back. Behind them, smoke painted the sky black. The wind carried no gunfire, no screams, just the crackle of a fire that meant freedom. Jonah caught up to them an hour later, limping but alive. Eliza met his eyes, said nothing. He gave a single nod. They kept walking. There were still other camps, still more children, still more work. But now they weren't alone. The wind carried the scent of ash for 3 days. Even as they moved farther into the north, the smoke from the burned camp seemed to follow, a phantom reminder of the choice they had made: to fight, to rescue, to leave ruin where monsters had once built their empires. Eliza didn't sleep much those nights. She lay with her back to a tree, rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the sky. Stars blinked through the branches like old gods watching in silence. Caleb curled beside her, no longer afraid of the dark but alert in it. Something in him had shifted, something neither she nor Jonah dared name aloud. He was still a boy, but not the same one they had taken back. Jonah kept watch most nights too. His limp had worsened since the last fight, but he said nothing about it. He moved slower, more deliberate, conserving what strength he had. Eliza noticed the way he touched his side when he thought no one was looking. She also noticed that he never left Caleb's side during the day, always scanning the tree line, always watching for more. On the 5th day, they came to the Black Range, a jagged wall of stone stretching across the horizon. It marked the edge of no man's land, territory, claimed by neither state nor tribe, a desolate, lawless expanse where old debts went to die. And it was here Jonah said they'd find the last camp. The big one, he told Eliza, voice low. It's where Slate was sending the rest, the children, the gold, the buyers. Her stomach turned. How many? At least 50 kids, maybe more, and a dozen men guarding them. 2 wagons, armed, organized. Caleb looked up at him. Do they hurt them? Jonah hesitated. Then, yes. There was no more talk after that. Just preparation. They took 3 days to reach the cliffs overlooking the final encampment. It was nestled in a valley carved by wind and time, flanked by sheer rock walls. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from cook fires. Horses were staked along the ridge. Armed men wandered between tents, rifles slung over shoulders, eyes watchful. But it was the children who seized Eliza's breath, caged. Not in wooden pens like before, but iron ones, thick rusted bars, padlocks so large they looked forged for war. Some of the kids sat huddled, too weak to stand. Others stared up at the sky like they'd forgotten what clouds looked like. Jonah crouched beside her, his breath misting in the morning cold. We can't do this one quiet. There's too many. So we go loud? Eliza asked. We go smart. We split them up, draw out the guards, sabotage the wagons, create chaos, and then we fight. She looked at Caleb. He met her gaze with eyes that had seen too much far too soon. I want to help, he said. Eliza shook her head. You've helped enough. I want to help more. Jonah studied him. You know what that means, don't you? Caleb nodded. That I might not come back. Jonah looked at Eliza. She closed her eyes, inhaled slow. Then, teach him what you can. We go at nightfall. They struck after sundown. Jonah slipped into the canyon first, setting fire to the southern supply tent. The flames leapt high, licking. The night with orange fury. Eliza circled north, cutting the reins of the horses and driving them into a frenzy. The beast charged through the camp, scattering men in every direction. Shouts rang out. Gunfire cracked. Then Caleb crawled beneath the cage wagons, stuffing wet cloth into the wheel hubs, just like Jonah had taught him. He moved fast, quiet, heart hammering so hard he thought the ground might hear it. When the first explosion hit, one of Jonah's traps near the cook fire, the valley descended into chaos. Eliza stormed the main tent, shotgun in hand. 2 men rose to stop her. She shot one in the chest, struck the other with the butt of her weapon. Jonah followed behind her, dragging one of the guards into the firelight, demanding answers. How many, where the buyers were, what time they'd return. The man spit blood and gave up everything. They'll be here by morning, he coughed. Armed, 2 wagons, double the men. Jonah looked at Eliza. We need to move, now. She nodded. I'll free the kids. Get them to the bluff. Can you hold them off? I'll try. He grabbed her wrist. If I fall, don't wait. Get them out. She stared at him. I'm not leaving you. You might have to. The words hung between them, heavier than the rifle she held. Then she was running, racing toward the cages with keys taken from the dead. Caleb was already there, picking at the locks with a stick. You're bleeding, she whispered. He shrugged. I'll live. One by one, the locks opened. Children poured out, some crying, others too dazed to speak. Eliza corralled them into a line, pressing her hands to their backs, urging them toward the dark path that led up the bluff. Then the buyers arrived. Wagons rumbled into the canyon like monsters awakened. Lanterns flared. Gunmen poured out, barking. Orders. One spotted the freed children and shouted. Jonah opened fire from above, a clean shot. Then another. Men dropped. Horses screamed. Gunfire lit the canyon like lightning. The rock walls echoed every crack, every scream. Eliza turned back. Keep going, she shouted at Caleb. Take them. Go. He hesitated. You promised. I will, she said. But I need you to believe it. And then she was running back into the fire. Jonah had taken a round to the leg and was half hidden, behind a rock outcrop. Blood seeped through his trousers. He looked up as she slid in beside him. Took your time. I brought company. Together they fired, reloaded, fired again. The buyers were better equipped, better trained, but Jonah and Eliza had something else. They had rage, purpose, loss, and that made them lethal. When Jonah's rifle jammed, Eliza handed him hers. When she ran out of shells, he tossed her a pistol. They fought like 2 halves of the same weapon, seamless and savage, but it wasn't enough. A bullet struck Jonah in the side. He grunted, fell back. Jonah, he waved her off. Go, finish it. She turned, sprinted for the last wagon. The, leader, a tall man in a fur coat, stepped out to meet her, revolver raised. Put it down, lady, ain't worth dying for. She said nothing, just raised her pistol and fired. The shot hit him in the neck. He dropped without a sound. By the time the last of the gunfire faded, the canyon was a graveyard. Eliza limped through the wreckage, blood on her hands, her coat torn. She reached Jonah just as he pulled himself to sit against a rock. You're bleeding out, she whispered. He smiled, teeth stained red. Not the worst way to go. She knelt beside him. We did it. You did it. You saved them. She squeezed his hand. You saved me first. He looked at her. Something soft in his gaze. Take him somewhere safe, raise him right. I will. Jonah exhaled slow, eyes fixed on the stars. Then he was still. Eliza buried him at the edge of the bluff. where the sun rose clear and bold every morning. She carved his name into a stone with the edge of her blade. No last words, no prayer, just his name. Caleb stood beside her, holding a bundle of wildflowers. He kept his promise, he said. She nodded. Now we keep ours. They walked south for days, guiding the freed children toward a safe town Jonah had once mentioned. It was a long journey, quiet and hard. But each morning, Caleb rose first to build the fire. And each night, Eliza stood, watch, rifle in hand. When they finally arrived, the town took them in, fed them, housed them, listened to the story. But Eliza never stayed. She left after the first snowfall, leaving Caleb with a schoolteacher who had lost her husband in the war and needed something to believe in again. He didn't cry when she left. He just hugged her hard. "Come back?" he asked. She cupped his face. "When the next child is safe." And then she was gone, a scarred drifter with no home but the trail, no peace but the promise she'd made in blood. They took her son to pay a debt, but a scarred drifter brought him back and became something more than she ever thought she could. Be not a mother, not a killer, a guardian. The kind legends are whispered about when the fire burns low.